This is Tech and Politics, and my name is Andreas Jungherr. Welcome back to the podcast accompanying the lecture series Digital Media in Politics and Society at the University of Bamberg. In this episode, we will continue our discussion about artificial intelligence and its impact on democracy. In this episode, we focus on AI's impact on equality and the competition between societies, some democratic, some not. Democracy depends on people's equality of rights. For meaningful self-government, people must have equal rights to representation, voting, and equal treatment by the law. While the actual degree of equality among people remains a consistent point of contention, the principle of equal rights is the foundation of any democracy. This makes it an important point of focus in the examination of how AI impacts democracy. And here, we find another area where AI might end up weakening democracy. AI is not a technology of equality. It is a technology of differentiation. By predicting how different people will behave under different circumstances based on observations from the past, AI differentiates between people based on criteria represented in data points. This opens it up to the risk of reinforcing existing biases in society and even porting socially, legally, and politically discontinued discriminatory patterns from the past into the present and future. This makes it a crucial subfield of continuous observation and auditing how the implementation of AI enforces biases and results in discriminatory practices. One area where AI potentially reinforces inequality is that different people are visible or invisible to it depending on their past representation in datasets. By now, various studies have shown that AI has trouble recognizing people who are underrepresented in data used to train its models. This includes instances where AI-based face recognition failed to identify women or non-Caucasian racial groups. While these studies refer to AI-based vision, we can transpose this general pattern into other potentially democratically more relevant contexts. For example, the systematic invisibility of specific groups means that they would be underrepresented in any AI-based representation of the body politic, or in predictions about their behavior, interests, attitudes, or grievances. Conversely, artificial intelligence also makes specific people more visible. For example, studies examining the use of AI in policing or the calculation of recidivism risks show that algorithms risk reinforcing historical biases found in the data. For one, specific areas predominantly housing economic or racial minorities that in the past were associated with higher rates of crime tend to be assigned higher police presence for the deterrence of crime. As a result, a high degree of criminal activity gets recorded in these areas, as there is a higher likelihood for police to pick it up here than in areas where they do not patrol. Accordingly, through an automatically assigned higher police presence, these areas will be continually showing heightened crime occurrences, simply because there's someone there to notice it. Similar crimes happening somewhere else with a lower police presence might go unrecorded, further lowering the chance for police to be sent there. If uncorrected, over time, this will lead to an increasing discrimination of areas and groups historically associated with higher crime rates. Historical biases and results of discriminatory practices recorded in official records, if unchecked, might lead an AI to reinforce said biases, even if a society is trying to move on and to enact more equal and less discriminatory practices. By making different people visible in different contexts, AI leads the state to treat people unequally, bringing the very real risk of a continuation of discriminatory practices from the past. There are attempts at debiasing AI, but this remains an area that necessitates continuous attention and auditing. If treated uncritically, AI might lead to a reinforcement of structural inequality and discrimination by continuation of trends visible in data. Conversely, AI might contribute to an increase of resources of already privileged individuals. For example, by making their voices, interests, attitudes, concerns, and grievances visible and accessible to decision makers through automated dashboards, or by overlaying these visible positions in predictions about trends and policy impact while ignoring voices by minorities invisible to AI. By different degrees of visibility to AI, some groups of people might therefore find their democratic influence systematically increased, while some groups might find it lowered. This would be a clear weakening of democracy by an undermining of the principle of equality. Leaving the perspective of the individual and of groups, AI also increases inequality between the power of commercial companies and the state. The bulk of AI development and its application is led by commercial companies. True, the theoretical breakthroughs in the current wave of AI started in university labs. But the practical application of these breakthroughs, like the Go playing AI AlphaGo, or the Jeopardy playing Watson, or their further development and broad rollout happened through commercial companies. In Genius Makers, Metz charts the nexus between academics and companies. His account shows that while universities still manage to train excellent people interested and able to work with and further develop AI, but universities appear not to be the places anymore where these people find the most exciting positions for research and development. Instead, this happens in commercial labs of companies like Google, Facebook, or Baidu. Over time, the power to innovate or even to critically interrogate AI shifts from public actors, like universities, to commercial actors. This also negatively impacts the abilities of oversight of the development and implementation of AI through democratically legitimated institutions like parliaments, governments, or regulators. Beyond the question of oversight, there's also the question of economic and political power. Through AI-based business models, companies like Google or Amazon have come to dominate multiple economic sectors and become near monopolists. Additionally, governments have started to rely on AI-based service providers like Palantir in support of their executive functions, like policing or security. This contributes to their dependency on companies and intransparent transfer of knowledge from governments to companies providing services. AI thereby potentially contributes to a shift of power within societies between different actors, benefiting companies developing AI while leading to a relative loss of economic and political power among other companies or governments. These developments might further weaken the balance of power in democratic societies by increasing systemic inequalities between the companies running and developing AI and everyone else, including governments. Right up until now, we have talked about the effects that AI can develop within democracies. But there's another dimension we need to consider. AI potentially also impact the relationship between democracy as a system of government compared to others, such as autocracies. Leaving aside normative considerations for a moment, in the past, democracies were seen to be superior to other forms of government, such as autocracies or dictatorships, due to their superior performance as information aggregators and processors. Governments all over the world face a shared challenge. They must decide on a course of action best suited to society or their interests, based on expected outcomes. This means collecting and feeding available information about the state of society or the consequences of specific actions in implicit or explicit models of how the world works, and to adjust one's actions accordingly. Here, democracies are seen to have a competitive advantage over autocracies or dictatorships. By allowing free expression, having a free and inquisitive press, competition between factions and even within governmental groups, democracies have structural mechanisms in place that surface information about society, the actions of bureaucracies, or the impact of policies, so that political actors can react and reinforce or countermand a course of action. Autocracies and dictatorships do not have the same mechanisms in place. By controlling speech and the media, they restrict information flows considerably, leaving governments often in the dark with regard to local situations, the preferences of the public, the behavior or corruption in their bureaucracies, and ultimately the consequences of the policies pursued by them. Democracy has thus been seen to allow for better information acquisition and processing performance as more centralized approaches of governance, such as autocracies or dictatorships. The underlying mechanism is akin to the higher performance of the market system compared to centralized planning with regard to economic outcomes. There now has been some debate over whether AI allows autocracies or dictatorships to overcome this disadvantage, especially with regard to China. China is seen to offer a context more suited for the large-scale deployment of AI than Western democracies. Reasons for this are the indiscriminate and large-scale collection of data and the state's willingness to support companies, which in any case remain under strong state control, to pursue AI in force. Over time, China would be therefore the country in which broad data collection and AI-based prediction of people's behavior be pervasive and ubiquitous. This would allow the authoritarian government to use AI as an information gathering and processing mechanism, potentially offsetting its challenges in information gathering by not having free expression or a free press. While you might not state your preference or dissatisfaction with the government in an official survey, running automated text analysis on your online chat protocols might unearth your true state of mind. While bureaucracies might keep you in the dark about the true state of the economy under your policies, an automated analysis of local payment patterns might indicate a surprising uptick or slowdown in the economy. Large-scale data collection and predictive analytics through AI might thus help autocrats and dictatorships to learn as much about their people and the effects of their policies as democracies. Perhaps even more, as they can use these tools more pervasively and efficiently. The degree to which this is a realistic hope is contested, but the implementation of China's social credit system is widely seen as an attempt by China's government to capitalize on this potential. China's social credit system is currently the most ambitious society-wide scoring system. The goal is to automatically track people and their behavior over multiple societal and economic domains in order to establish the degree of compliance with rules. Behavior conforming with domain-specific rules is rewarded with positive scores. Conversely, behavior conflicting with rules is punished by taking points away. Examples for negative behavior vary, but can include hearing loud music, or eating on public transport, crossing red lights, or cheating in online games. People with an overall positive score can find themselves fast-tracked with regard to credit applications, while those with negative scores can find themselves excluded from public services. Scores are assigned automatically based on conforming or deviant behavior captured by sensors, such as public surveillance cameras or other digital devices. This system provides the state with a vast pool of data on its people, potentially allowing it to infer opinions, predict unrest, learn about the effects of its possibilities, and shape individual behavior. Before we become too enamored or scared by this vision of total surveillance and control, we should not forget the tendency of people to learn and undermine attempts at surveillance and government control. Although currently stories about advertised features and supposed successes of China's social credit system abound, it is best to remain critical as to its actual workings and precision. Still, the social credit system underlines a point made by Li. Li expects that the autocracy China is currently better placed than Western democracies in capitalizing on the potentials of AI. The close connection between the state and companies developing and deploying AI provides an environment of permissive privacy regulation, providing AI developers with vast troves of data, allowing them to refine models of human behavior. Add to this centrally allocated resources and the centrally encouraged training of large numbers of AI-savvy engineers and managers, and the result is a considerable competitive advantage in developing, deploying, and profiting from AI-supported systems. Sooner or later, this will translate from pure engineering power into soft or cultural power. Once AI-enabled Chinese digital platforms will provide users with better entertainment or commercial opportunities than Western platforms, they will capture their user base and assume their central role in cultural, commercial, or political life in countries well beyond China. An early example for this is the Chinese video platform TikTok. Now, Western democracies might be able to shrug off that personalized music clips or funny videos were distributed through digital infrastructures hosted in China rather than the US. But AI-driven power shifts can also happen in other, more crucial areas. An example is the question whether European publics might be willing to forgo procedures allowing for the prolonging and improving of life based on the AI-enabled manipulation of DNA through CRISPR due to restrictive European regulation on biotech, AI, and data use. Going further, AI is a technology increasingly discussed in military and security circles. While the level of its current and future workings and effects in these areas are heavily contested, the growing concerns in these circles point to the broad perception of the associated dangers for democracies to fall behind autocracies and dictatorships in this regard. Scenarios like this illustrate the real pain points emerging once an AI implementation and development gap opens up between democracies and autocracies. This brief discussion shows that AI's impact on democracy might not only refer to internal features. Instead, over time, differential trajectories in the development and deployment of AI in democracies and autocracies and dictatorships might come to matter. If the assumption holds that autocracies and dictatorships share a greater affinity to AI and can offer it a more promising environment than democracies, AI might lead to a power shift between systems and weaken democracy in turn. Looking back at this and the previous episodes, we see many areas of the potential impact of artificial intelligence on democracy. While many AI applications and their subsequent effects still lie in the future, we already see AI's impact on several areas connected to democracy. Accordingly, political science needs to examine more systematically how AI is developed in these contact areas and connect patterns and trends to core concerns of democratic theory and the measurement of democratic quality. As we have seen, it is important not to get sidetracked by grandiose but ultimately imaginary visions of general artificial intelligence. Instead, we should focus on specific instances of narrow AI, their uses in specific areas of interest, and their effects. The discussion has shown that AI does not necessarily have to contribute to democratic decline. Still, there are many areas of contact in which we need to examine AI's uses and effects. These are the function of elections as organized uncertainty, about a temporal settlement of political conflict, the ability of people to decide themselves about who should govern them, equality within societies, and the competition between democracy and other systems of political rule. These areas can serve as focus points where we can look for effects of AI on democracy. But where does this leave the young, enterprising social scientist interested in effects of AI on society and politics, but not trained in developing AI itself? There are many research opportunities in this area, and far too few people work on this in a serious manner. In other words, opportunities abound. On a very basic level, there is need for more systematic work on how AI is employed in politics and by governments. There are a few early studies, for example, in the area of predictive policing or the legal system, but they are comparatively few and predominantly focused on the US. This provides opportunities for local cases in different contexts from the US or for comparative work. Much of what we think we know about AI in society is based on journalistic accounts. While those can be deeply instructive, there's consistent need for systematic scientific accounts of these developments in different sectors and societies. There's also a consistent stream of studies examining the biases of specific AI systems in specific contexts. This could be the auditing of AI-driven analysis of text and images, or the implementation of AI in societal processes, such as policing, judicial sentencing, or credit decisions. In a twist on this template, you can also use AI to study historical biases in society by examining historical large-scale datasets of text or images and identify the distribution and shifts in the representation of specific societal groups, for example, along gender or racial lines. Building on this, there's also the need for systematic work on the regulation of AI in different countries and contexts. While these are admittedly early days for the official regulation of AI, they are interesting early activities. One surely is the government-induced support for AI-focused research and development. Be it in the US, the EU, or China, governments have identified AI as an area of strategic geopolitical and economic competition. Examining competing policy initiatives trying to drive innovation is a promising early step in examining government's relation with AI and related policy and regulation. Beyond this, earlier comparative studies regarding the regulation of privacy or platform business models can offer templates for subsequent work with a focus on AI. Finally, the development of AI as a scientific and commercial field is a promising subject for research itself. The highly interdisciplinary nature and shifts in the vanguard of AI development between scientific disciplines, academy and business, and geographic areas between USA, Canada, and China makes this into a very interesting case of the contemporary science, commerce, society nexus. Going further, AI is increasingly used within the social sciences as a method of discovery. The associated shifts in scientific workflow, questions asked, and subsequent approaches to theorizing are a fertile area of future reflection. All in all, this shows that there are many promising avenues for future scientific work on the impact of AI on democracy. Here, it is important to leave field-specific blinders behind. Political science might be slow in addressing these questions, but other scientific fields are already hard at work. Many of these questions are already addressed by computer scientists, ethicists, sociologists, legal scholars, and communication scientists. It is important to recognize and build on this work, irrespective of its origin. As we have seen, this interdisciplinary work addresses many questions relevant to democracy. This means it is high time for political scientists to add their voice and perspective to the ongoing debate about the impact of AI on democracy. In other words, it's time to get back into the game. On this rousing perspective on future work and opportunities, so much for artificial intelligence. In the next episode, we will leave AI behind and focus on the growing availability and use of data and algorithms in society and politics. As always, the script to this episode can be found online on the course website, digitalmedia.andreasjungherr.de. There, you will find detailed sources, references to further reading, links, and preparatory questions for the exam. This was Tech and Politics, the podcast of the Chair for the Governance of Complex and Innovative Technological Systems at the University of Bamberg. I'm Andreas Jungherr. Have fun reading, and see you soon.